Okay, I think we're gonna get started now. So if you just came in, welcome to the poker workshop, and please sign the attendance code. Just scan it now, and then oh shit, it's still frozen. Yeah, scan the attendance, please. To the like 5 people that walked in. Yeah. Anyways, so just like a quick like motivation behind like why this workshop's here, right? It's basically because at the end of the day, there's still a great element of like chance in the game of poker. Like you can't necessarily predict everything that's going to happen, so you have to. Oh, how it looks. So basically, you have to predict stuff using probability because you don't know for sure like what is going to happen next in the game. So the main sort of like underpinning like number we have to consider is your equity, which is basically the probability that you win on the river, given that no one folds and then you get dealt the river. But of course, that's not necessarily a number you would know like directly, right? Like you don't know your opponent's cards, so you don't know your opponent like if they're gonna hit as well, so you don't know your chances of winning like directly, right? So the best we can do is estimate, and then one way of estimating it is by considering our outs. And our outs is just the cards that we could possibly draw to make a better hand. So for example, if you have like I don't know, pocket threes, and then there's like a pair of fours on the board on the flop, then an out would be, for example, like a 3 or 4 for a full house. Yeah, here's another example. So let's just say you have 10-8 offsuit, and then the board is Jack 8-10. Then you have a full house draw with 4 possible outs, that being the 2 10s and the 2 8s. And then this is how we estimate our equity at some given time using outs. So if we have like n outs and we're say on the flop, then we have a 4n% chance to hit an out by the river. And then if you're on the turn, then there's a 2n% chance to hit an out. And these are all approximations, but they're like reasonably accurate and they're quite easy to calculate. So it's like something that's viable to consider. And here's an example. So let's just say we have king 10 hearts, and then the board is ace of hearts, 3, and then 8 of hearts. And then we want to hit the nut flush. So we just want any other like heart. So there's going to be 9 other like hearts that we could possibly hit. Those are going to be our outs. We multiply that by 4, given that we're on the turn. So there's an approximately 36% chance of hitting the nut flush by the river. Similarly, let's just say the next card dealt on the turn is the 7 of spades. Then we still have 9 outs, so our odds are approximately 2 times 9, which is 18%. But that's not the only like number we should be considering. There's a lot of other like metrics that are also quite important. The main one being pot odds, which is just the ratio between the amount to call and then the future pot if you were to call. This is basically like a metric of risk to reward ratio in a sense. Like how much am I willing to risk in order to win X amount, right? So for example, let's just say the pot is 60 and then your opponent bets 20 and that's your action. Then it's 20 to call, and if you do call, then it would be a total pot of 100. The pot would be like 80, and then your pot odds would be around 25%. And here's how we like use pot odds to inform some decisions, right? So if we have some equity estimate, if it's higher than our pot odds, then it's profitable to call. That's like the main principle here. It's basically just saying the chances of me winning are better than my risk to reward ratio, so it's profitable in that sense. And then if you're really lazy and you don't want to calculate, then if you have some like bet, which is a proportion of the pot, for example, half pot, this pot, 2/3 pot, quarter pot, etc. These are some like common like pot odds you might want to like consider. And similarly, if you're going in the other direction where you want to price an opponent out by raising the like pot odds ridiculously high, so you don't possibly have the equity to play on, then you can also use this table as well, where you can just bet some ridiculous amount, and then it's the opposite way of reading it. Another like number you can consider is the minimum defense frequency, or MDF for short. And then this is basically the same as 100% minus the pot odds. And then this is like a rough like measure of like how frequently you should defend your hands. And the whole idea of it is just that if your opponent bluffs a lot, then you want to be defending your hands a lot more frequently because they're going to be raising like a lot. But if your opponents don't bluff at all, there's no point in trying to defend what there isn't to defend. There's no point in trying to like bluff cash. So if they don't bluff, if they're just like purely they're like a crazy nit and they only play like top pair or something, like probably not the best idea. And then on the opposite end, there's alpha, which is basically the opposite of MBF. It's like now it's your perspective, and you want to start bluffing. Then your alpha, which is 100% minus your MDF, or the same number as your pot odds, is the frequency which you need your opponents to fold against a bluff to break even. So, for example, let's just say the pot is 10 big blinds, and then you bluff with a pot size bet. Then your alpha is 50%. So if your opponent would fold 50%, more than 50% of the time to that sort of bet, then a bluff will at least break even. That's basically what alpha is saying. Is like, when can I at least break even or make money off a bluff? Another really important like number to keep track of is like your stack size, right? Because if your stack is say very small, then you don't want to be making really risky moves. It's one wrong move and you're like out, right? On the contrary, if your stack size is very big, you have a lot of money to play around, push around other players, overbet, and price them out basically. So you have a lot of like wiggle room in that sense. So here's like a rough like guide of like how big your stack would be in each category. So you have like small stack size, less than 40 big blinds, medium, big, and deep. If you're like around small to medium, I guess if you're like small, then that could be considered like roughly like short stack. If you're like big or deep, it's like somewhat like deeper the stack. And yeah, so if you have a $20 stack with 5-cent, 10-cent blinds, then you have 200 big blinds, which is relatively deep. So as I said before, when you're short stacked, you don't have that much money to play around with, right? So you don't want to be bluffing that much. Because, well, if you like try to bluff, then you just get like re-raised and then it's all over from there. Whereas if you have a very big stack, then you can just like price out opponents a lot easier using pot odds basically. Like if you overbet by like a crazy amount, then you can pretend that you have a lot higher equity than you do, and then that might force your opponents to fold. So that's the main like sort of principle around stack size, is that it basically guides how aggressive you can play. Yeah, and here's like one example of like, I guess, bluffing, right? So if you have like a low suited connector, for example, 2, 3 of hearts, or like say 6, 7 of clubs, then you could very well hit like a flush draw or like a straight draw on the flop. But the thing is, you have to keep on playing and putting in more money into the pot in order to actually realize that equity. So they're very speculative hands, which is why playing them like more often on short stack is like not very profitable, because you have like, if you don't hit the draw, then it's kind of over. You just waste all your money, and you can't really bluff it either because you don't have the capital to like price out in case your opponent has a better hand. So this is an example of like what I mean by not bluffing as much. Whereas like if you had that same hand and then you didn't hit your draw, but you had a bigger stack, then you can still play it into a bluff and then try and make your opponents fold. And then like the last sort of ratio we can consider, or like number, is the stack to pot ratio, or SPR. And it's just the ratio between the effective stack size and the pot after action. So the effective stack size here is just the smallest stack at the table, which is kind of like a guide of like how deep everyone is in terms of their stack. Now, why is this important? if you have a low SPR, that basically means the pot is like much larger than everyone's stack, like on average. And what that basically means is that everyone's committed, right? Like they all have all their money in the pot for the most part. So what that basically means is that it simplifies the game down to, do I want to fold or do I want to like bet? Like you can either go like, I guess if you have a really small stack, you can either go all in or you can just fold. It's like if you're pot committed, those are really your only two decisions. Whereas if you have a high SPR, then it's kind of the opposite. There's a lot more ability to bluff because everyone has huge stacks, so you can just keep on putting money into the pot. But there's also less commitment. So if you have a weaker hand, then you don't necessarily have to commit to your decisions. Yep. So that's like all the like numbers you have to consider, but like we also have to consider like ranges, right? And if you don't know what a range is just the collection of hands a player could hold. So you could have your own range, you could have like your opponent's range and so on. And then the reason why we think of like ranges instead of just like what exactly your opponent has is because like you don't know for certain what your opponent has unless they show you, right? So the best thing you can do is just guess which variety of hands they could have. Like they could have like ace 10, ace king, but you don't know for sure if they have like say ace 3 or like 10-7. So the best thing you can do is just guess a variety of hands rather than one specific one. Because if you guess wrong in the case where you guess only one hand, then you might make the wrong decision. And the whole like principle behind like why we think about ranges is just information. Like ranges and information are basically very similar, right? So for example, if you're out of position, you have a lot less information to act on, which means, and by out of position, I mean you act earlier on in each round. Whereas if you're like, say, button on like pre-flop, then you see everyone's action before you, so you can have a rough gauge of like what cards they might have. If they have a stronger hand, they might have betted. If they have a weaker hand, they might have just limped it. Who knows, right? But if you're, say, like under the gun, well, you don't get all that information. Secondly, is like stack depth. So what I was saying before, if you have like a short stack, you might play a lot tighter. If you have a deep stack, you might be bluffing more often. So that might also give you some information about what cards someone has. And then also aggression. So if you were to say like bet or like raise, then that might sift out people with like really weak hands. And you can have a rough idea, like maybe the top some percent of like cards being played table. So now I'm going to talk about capped and uncapped ranges. So basically, this is like kind of narrowing down your estimate of like what someone's hand could be, basically. So what we say by capped, in terms of a player's range, basically means that you know their hand is only as good as something. So for example, if like big blind checks pre-flop, they might have a weaker hand, so you know they might not have something like say like pocket aces or something. Conversely, you have an uncapped range, which is basically they could have the best possible cards in that situation. So, for example, if they like 4-bet on the turn, they could have like a very strong hand, right? They could have the nuts actually. Whereas if they just checked on the turn, then it could be a sign that they don't have anything crazy strong. So they might have like a cap range. Yeah. And of course, how capped ranges are also depends on the board. So for example, if you have like 5-9, you might be checking pre-flop, but when the flop hits and it's say like something ridiculous like that, then you basically have like the nut straight flush draw. Whereas on the other side, if you have like ace king and the board was like that, you just have ace high, which is not necessarily like the nuts, so it might be a bit capped. And we say one player has a range advantage when a large proportion of their possible hands just have stronger equity, basically. So if we know someone's like range advantage roughly, or like we know our own like range advantage, there's a couple of things we can do to be more profitable. So if we know that our range is just better, we can just bet more frequently to extract more value. And also, if you know your opponent's capped, you can use larger bet sizing to like kind of exploit them. And if you have some sort of board where you have a lot of draws, then bluffing more often is also like a decent idea. But if you know that you're at a disadvantage, then you might want to be defending a lot more than you might be otherwise. And then similar to range advantage, we have something called the nut advantage, which is basically the proportion of your hands that could have or like could hit the nuts basically. So it only considers the nuts rather than every single other like pairing. So when you are like advantaged, you can just bet more frequently. Similarly, if you're more disadvantaged, you play more defensively. And you can also try to bluff the nut advantage. You can like trick your opponent into thinking that you have some ridiculous like hand. And especially if you have like blockers, it's like a bit more possible. So that's also something you can do if you know, or like if you're trying to like bluff when you know that you don't necessarily have the best possible hand. So now I'll just give it to Daria, who's going to go through 4 fundamental shapes.
Okay. So basically, when people play the hands, they usually like have 4 ranges out of them that you can put them on, and we want to put them on a collection of hands. And first of all, we want to put them on the range. Obviously, you can profile people, and the younger they are, the wider the range is, so the more polarized it is. But let's start with the linear one. Linear one is super, super tight. It's that picture is if under the gun opens, and the red hands are the hands that he's supposed to open with, and everything else is fold. You can say that there's no calls because if the people that, like if the person from under the gun does call, then they're more likely to raise after that. Anyways, so that range is super, super tight. It only has like ace and off or higher, or like all the suited aces, all the pocket pairs, and all like premiums. And this range you will most likely face when people like open raise, when they free bet, or when they're shoving. Most likely they'll never shove with anything but these hands. But then if you're facing younger opponents, if you're facing more experienced opponents, they'll have polarized range, which consists of a good hands and really trash hands. And the reason why there's trash hands is because they want to play it to show the bluffs. So if you only play the nuts, no one will ever call you because every time you raise, you have something. So you want to play polarized range to say that like, oh, I can also play the shit hands. And then when you have a good hand, you get paid. So usually on this picture, that's the polarized range. All the green ones are the good hands that has high EV where you will raise. All the red ones have lower or negative EV, but you also raise with them to induce the bluffs and just bluff. Then you have a condensed one. Condensed one is just looks like a line. There's no, like it's in the middle. It only has medium hands. It doesn't have any like super strong hands. It doesn't have any like super bad hands. And it's the polarized range. And that is more likely just to raise. It will never free bet. It wouldn't shove. And usually you want to check into that and just realize your equity on the flop or realize your equity on the turn. Then you have a notched one. So this picture shows if button opens what you should call with, which is green, and what you should raise with on the big blind. So this is like the really, really loose hand. And it has everything. It has like polarized in the sense of like you will raise ace-5 suited for the bluff, but you also raise aces for the value. You will call all suited connectors, including low suited connectors, just to see if you hit the flop. And you want to play this one, so you will less likely to be predicted on the flop. And you want to play more linear ranges when you play on the smaller sizes when you have lower rake. So let's say like if you're playing on a line poker or if you're playing at the star, you want to play linear, you will play polarized because people are more likely to play condensed or linear there. So you want to like play against them. But then like you'll play with the smaller sizes, you'll play linear and you're less likely to be re-raised there. So you would just play that. Anyways, that's all for that. So that's a recap. If you're playing capped, you have no nuts. If you play uncapped, you have the nuts. If you play linear, then you have super value and you usually will fold like bad hands. If you have polarized, you have nuts and you have nothing and people will less likely to predict you. If you have condensed, you have just medium hands, you don't have nothing and you don't have nuts, and merged is just everything in together. Now ICM.
All right. Hello, everyone. I'm going to be going through ICM. This is the most applicable thing to tournaments. So let me get this. Oops. So we're trying to tailor this presentation to tournament play. And I guess the main differences between everything you've heard already and the, I guess, change with tournaments is that your goal goes from making the most money hand by hand to now becoming just survive as long as possible, right? In a tournament, money ramps up over time. Oftentimes it's like non-linear. It's like a kind of exponential curve. And so it leads to a completely different mindset that you want to be taking going into them. So if I go here, so the independent chip model basically just says the value for a stack or whatever amount of, like whatever individual chip is non-linear, right? So with a bigger stack, it's not like doubling your stack size doubles your value, right? In reality, it may only 1.5x your value or even less, right? And that's because as the time goes on in a tournament, you end up in a situation where everyone's got 10 to 20 starting stacks, and you're still on the same kind of playing level, right? So it becomes non-linear, which means, yeah, there you go. Losing your stack it costs more than doubling gives you, right? So you need to be thinking about this sort of thing when you're shipping all in, because if you're losing your stack, you're losing your tournament life, right? But realistically, the value you get by doubling just doesn't match leaving the tournament entirely, right? Then again, though, if you're just starting out a tournament, right, and you're at the very start of your game, you've got one starting stack, and everyone else is in the same kind of position. Even just doubling your stack, it doesn't really give you a crazy amount of value because you're still nowhere near getting paid, right? Normally, by the time you get paid, it's like, I don't know, it depends on how many people are in the game. If there's 100 people, you might top 15 get paid, right? And that'll only happen when you're starting to get closer to like 10 starting stacks. So the value only actually gets realized when you double 5 or 6 times. So once that value has accrued and you're right on the edge of getting paid, there is what we call the bubble, right? The bubble is just basically it occurs when you are right on the edge of getting paid, right? And everyone in the tournament is so close to being paid, and the risk of I guess that the benefit you get by doubling up isn't nearly as good as just staying in for one more person to get busted, right? And so during that kind of stage, I think I've got another thing here. During that kind of stage, you enter this spot where it is almost never valuable for you to call or ship all in. And so everyone really tightens up, and you kind of start waiting until a table gets a situation where 2 people have extreme premium hands, right? Aces, kings, queens, anything better than like tens. So that includes aces, ace king, suited, that sort of thing. Once you're there, though, that's when things like fall apart, right? People with premiums, they'll play, and the bubble will burst, right? And so when you're on that bubble, your ICM pressure is like at the maximum it can ever be, right? Because like even gaining anything is worth nothing compared to losing and getting chucked out of the game, right? Because you're just going from a crazy amount of EV, like whatever your like the midway between 0 and the first pay jump is 2-0, right? So it's really important that you play the bubble, as best as possible. The way you play the bubble though changes depending on what your stack is, right? If you're in a short stack and you're, just trying to survive, just trying to get over that bubble edge and make some money, right? You're in a really tough spot, right? Because if you enter any sort of hand and you lose, chances are you're probably out. Like you're probably just going to go out. Whereas in a big stack, the worst that happens is you play, you chip up a short stack, and then you're still fine, right? So it's really important when you're in the big stack on a bubble that you play a lot wider, right? Your range should increase. And that way you, one, have a bigger chance at knocking someone else out and getting through the bubble yourself. Or two, the downside from losing a hand becomes basically 0. So the kind of converse happens for a short stack, right? There is no longer any point to be playing every hand. And it's way more important that you're winning the hands that you do play, right? So your range just comes really super tight. I mentioned anything better than like tens is probably playable, right? But you need to remember, in a tournament, the levels or the blinds that increase over time really start to drain you. And especially by the time you get to the bubble, if you're a short stack, you could have 1 or 2 big blinds in your stack. And not playing just means you get bled out because everyone else is not playing. And the blinds will just come around to you and you'll get killed, right? So whenever, say you've got like the blind is like three people to your right and you've got 1 big blind, you're gonna be put all in. You have to start thinking about longevity and whether the hand you have now is the best you're gonna have between now and the time the big blind gets to you, right? Because then you're gonna get knocked out. Now, yes. So as you're playing through the levels, right? If there are like, as in this case, the levels is meaning the pay levels, right? I mentioned at the start that the pay levels are non-linear, right? They're kind of exponential. And when you've got small payout jumps, right? So this is after the bubble has occurred and everyone's making money. You want to maximize your value in the long term, right? And so the benefit from not playing on small jumps is actually far lower than it is playing, right? You want to be playing as much as you can so you can set yourself up to be earning as much as you can. The slides are wrong. So play slightly tighter. You're going to play slightly looser. Then once the jumps get really large, your EV, every time someone gets knocked out, your prize increases, right? So your EV to not play is a lot higher, right? So you want to tighten up your range on big jumps. Now I mentioned before, if you've got a big stack, you really have to use it, right? In a tournament, a big stack is a gift, and you really want to get that, benefit over your opponents to try and keep the lead going, right? And so if you've got a big stack, you really should use it as a weapon. You should bluff people out of hands where they might not be able to call because the ICM kind of theory or the rules says that they shouldn't call, right? Because the EV isn't good for that. So I've got an example here. So suppose you have a dominant chip lead at the final table, and a medium stack opens from early position. Even with a modest hand, you should profitably 3-bet shove. And the reason for that is the medium stack is far more likely to do this with a hand that isn't quite at the top of their range. And you have the opportunity to play quite an unpolarized range to catch out these bluff kind of hands. And in the worst case, it's risk-free. You're probably still up heaps if you lose the hand. But if you win, you're knocking people out, you are increasing your lead, and it becomes much more dominant as time progresses. So this is just more of a sum up. Small stacks, you're looking to ship all in when you've got good value, right? Obviously, you're going to be playing a tighter range, but in that range, your options are not call or slight raise, right? It is shove or fold, right? Because if you're playing a hand, you want to realize all of the equity, all of the like potential winnings from your stack, right? If you're just calling and then the next card comes out and it's crap for you, and then you're folding, you've just pissed away half your stack, right? Whereas if you're a larger stack, you need to be playing way wider and applying as much pressure to the smaller stacks as you can to induce those all-ins. So yeah, basically, in a tournament structure, you want to maximize your life so that you can maximize your winnings. And a lot of that just comes down to picking the kinds of ranges you should be playing so you can be most profitable in the long run, not just in the current round. Okay, I think RF.
Okay, now moving. Oh, hello, Ollie. We're moving on to the last section, which is about position. So this obviously is transferable for both cash and tournaments, but it's kind of like bringing everything that we talked about already together. So just basic definitions. In position, out of position refer to like when you're acting relative to other players. If you're early to act or even first to act, you're out of position. And if you're late to act, then you are in position. The way that we look at the position is at least pre-flop, and you can see the seats. Yeah, you can see the seats. So under the gun, +1, and low jack would be early position, and then obviously if you in terms of pre-flop, big blind is last to act, but then that changes because button would be last to act if we get to the flop, and yeah. And so because of this, and because of the advantages that you have with being in position, that also is why if you look at any solvers, it would tell you if you're playing like under the gun or under the gun +1, you should play really tight, because if you want to raise, you have a far more likely chance of getting 3-bet or 4-bet. Yeah. And so why is position important? Kind of says it out here. So the player that's in position, so in this case we're defining it as last to act, it is it's up to them essentially how large the pot is, and also it's up to them as to when we can see the next card. And they also, just based on what other people did, they have more information, right? Like if you're in position and your opponent checks on a board that maybe doesn't really connect with their range, you can know a little more. What are you shooting your head for? But yeah. So the example that we have here is if we are out of position and what? Lower. Okay. So if we are out of position and you follow a very simple strategy of, okay, I hit the flop, I bet. If I don't hit the flop, I fold. well, you're not gonna hit the flop that often, and so a very easily exploitable strategy for the in-position player is if you bet, they fold, and if you check, which will be most of the time, because most of the time you aren't hitting the flop, they're just gonna bet and force you off that hand. As such, what we need to do in terms of being out of position player is we want to mix in some of our value hands and checking hands. This is called protecting our check range. But now, checking with your value hands also has a bit of an issue because let's say you have a really strong hand, like you have an overpair, but there's two to a flush on the board. If you check with the intention of protecting your checking range, and the in-position player has a flush draw, they check back, and the turn comes and makes the flush, then all of a sudden your precious overpair that you probably 3-bet or 4-bet pre-flop into becomes very scary for you to play, and you don't like that. And also, if they completely break, then they're also happy to just check back, and you are never seeing an ounce of value from them. Yep, and so this is a bit of a conceptual thing that ties in with what Jeff was talking about in terms of SPR. So the higher your SPR, your stack to part ratio, the bigger the advantage is for the in-position player. This is because like if we have a larger SPR, then as the in-position player, we can bet a lot bigger and we can apply a lot more pressure, right? Like let's say the pot is only 10 big blinds. Well, then your bet sizings will be a lot smaller than if it's already like 50 big blinds and you have half your stack in. And then so just in terms of more strategies, like specifically what to do, when we're out of position, we really do want to call less. I have some numbers from solvers on the next slide, and then yeah, it actually should say check. Yeah, it's like what I said before. Consider the case of the flush draw, and because like the worst thing to do in the world is if you wake up with a monster, you check, they check back, and then you try to bet and they fold. That sucks for everyone. And then one of the ways that we can avoid the advantages of being out of position is don't be out of position. And the best way to do that is raise bigger. So normally, if we're in position, we want to start our raises at 3x. You want to bump that up to 4x out of position because you're a lot happier to have folds, so you don't have to play out of position. And yeah. And this logic also continues because you're out of position at every street, so we're always happy to get them to fold on the flop or on the turn. And yeah, these are some charts. I'm pretty sure they're from cutoff versus small blind. So the first one is the decision strategy for being in position. As you can see, we want to bet pretty often. We want to bet 78.7% of the time, with a heavy preference for smaller bets, and we want to check back less often at 20%. And then inversely, for being out of for being out of position, when we do bet, we want to have more checking because again, like you're rarely in a good spot, but if you do want to bet, go a little bigger. Yep. And then that is more or less it. We have a Kahoot that Alex kindly designed. We'll put it up. Wait, Jeff, how do you want to put up the Kahoot? Oh my god.
So
How are we gonna do this?
unfortunately, because Kahoot is a bunch of like cheapskates, you can't host a Kahoot game for more than 10 people without a premium account. And the one guy who has a premium account is going to be here in 10 minutes. So unfortunately, we have to wait until then. If you haven't signed the attendance form, just like sign it now. But What's the question?
Uh,
Oh yeah, if you have any questions, yeah.
So let's say in live play, right? I assume most of this is like theoretical. How would you say the biggest difference between low stakes live players compared to a theoretical correct?
Low stakes light play.
Yeah.
Just like a like $10
Like-
cash game.
Yeah.
I mean, depends who you're playing with. Like, it's also a major factor as well. If you're just playing casually, then there's not going to be as many bluffs, right?
Yeah.
So you shouldn't be considering stuff like MBF and like alpha and stuff. Of course, pot odds and equity are still like quite important to consider, but like at those stakes and like with those frequencies, you can pretty much just like play like a nit and make money.
If you're playing cash and you're playing like really light stacks and like there becomes a difference if the person who's playing doesn't actually value the $10 that they're putting in.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, definitely.
Like they could just get bored at a way higher frequency and bluff way more often.
Right.
And so ranges become really fine.
And you also play not with the big blinds, but you play with money on the cash game. Because it's like if you raise to like you're playing a 5-10 and you raise to 3 big blinds, surely on the fundament it's a big range.
Yep.
But in real life, it's raised to 5%. Even if I raise to 5%, I would.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
it's not the money.
Like stakes matter a lot. It's like let's just say I'm like one more all the time, right?
Yeah.
I'm normally raising to $10. That's like the whole buy-in. So like
Let's go, bro.
Yeah, bro. What I'm saying is like someone like me, I don't really like
What are you, bro?
Someone that lives in
maybe not like
So what Alex is saying is that if you know someone's rich, you can probably get a little bit more value out of him, and he's offering himself up as a great example. So if you guys ever see him at our Wednesday 1-1 games, it's an open invitation to take his money.
But like legitimately, right? This is why I'm a tournament player because I don't have a crazy bankroll or money that I want to put in.
right, yeah.
So when I'm playing cash, my value compared to what I've got on the table is much different to what someone else has, right? So I exclusively play tournaments because it doesn't matter how rich someone is outside of a tournament.
Yeah.
If they bust, they're out of the tournament. Sure, they might not care as much, right?
Yeah.
But like the actual difference in direct play is much smaller in a tournament than it is in a cash.
Yeah. Okay, fair. Thank you.
and I'm just gonna add it to
Let's go.
I'm not gonna lie. So basically, like, let's just say early game tournaments, right? I'm probably like loaded with like half of you here. If you're like a beginner player, sometimes your tells are too obvious. Like, sometimes let's just say if I raise you and you go like, right, cool. Obviously, I know you're gonna be weak. Like, and I'm just gonna like try and help you out. So what I'm saying is like, when you're betting and like just in general, your poker face should be more skilled. I've probably got like 5 years out there.
Also, about the ranges, if you're playing someone with a high ego, their range will be much longer.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Can we revisit the pod section? Because I kind of got it, but it also, like, I don't think I fully understand.
Okay, so pot odds, the math is just the amount that you have to call divided by what's in the pot and what what's the future pot basically. Wow, that's not the best stuff. Yeah, like this is just the formula. Because let's say there's like the example here, because it costs you 20 to call, and then after you call, the future pot will be $80, and so your pot odds are 4-1, and if you're using pot odds to evaluate, you generally want to.
It should be 100. Yeah.
That's
typo.
Oh yeah, it's a typo, but it should be it should be 20%. So so as long as you're confident in winning more than 20% of the time, you are more comfortable with calling.
Oh, so it's just like
It's just risk to reward ratio.
Yeah.
how much it costs to win.
Yeah. This guy is like crazy good at tournaments. You guys should ask him about it. What's your biggest win, Alex? Yeah, walk us through it, Alex.
What am I to walk through?
Well, you called me.
Okay.
Okay.
No. Bro, free rolls are kind of goated, like he. No, I won the Susquehanna tournament last year, which was like $5,000 off a free roll, which is. You'd be surprised. There were no poker players. That's all quant people. So it's like honestly.
Yeah, because you have to do the estimation.
Yeah, there was like some bullshit quant stuff you have to do to get in. So like I wasn't playing against poker players. So just the very limited amount of study that I did was probably more than most of them did, and turns out it gave me at least a bit of an edge. I did get lucky, obviously. You can't win a tournament without luck.
So the moral of the story is that we should run an estimation workshop so everyone in this room can get it.
Legitimately, yes. We had what 3, 4 PokerSoc people at Susquehanna. Ollie. Oh fuck this guy. I think we had a few PokerSoc people there this year, but it would be great to see more representation there. Mind you, it's literally infinite EV if you like just sign up, right? Like they were flying people out for this thing, right? They would fly people from New Zealand, post you up in the W for the weekend for a chance at a free roll for $5,000. Like holy life hack! I gotta leave my job and just start going for Susquehanna, bro. Anyway, I think I gotta leave.
Okay.
Anyone else have any questions?
5 minutes? I don't know. 5 to 10 minutes.
Yeah, it was like
Yep.
it was like 20 minutes.
Okay.
Okay, so the early slides were just a bit of a background into why we do, like, why we have poker theory. Because the core idea, especially in tournaments where the variance is higher, is that you cannot evaluate how good of a decision you made just based on did you win, right? Like, you can't say, oh, I won this hand, or I won, like, X amount of money, therefore I made a correct decision. You have to really, you cannot be results oriented. That's the worst thing to do. And so the correct approach is to look at numbers. And yeah, the first sections were just about the basic probability that we use, a couple of definitions. So yeah, equity is the probability that you win the pots. The outs that you have are like the cards that improve your hand to a winning hand. So for example, if you have 2 spades and there's 2 spades on the board, then you have 9 spade outs because those can make it flush. What's very important is that you don't conflate your outs with your percentage chance of winning, right? Because it's actually your chance of winning is actually a bit lower. So you shouldn't be just saying, oh, I have this amount of outs, because your opponent can always improve to better, right? Probably the most clear example is still with flushes. Let's say you have the king high flush, like flush draw. You could have 9 outs theoretically. If your opponent has the ace high flush draw, then all of your outs are worthless, and you have absolutely no way of knowing that. Similarly, even if the ace high flush draw, your opponent could have a set, in which case they can make a boat with a lot of cards. Yep. Then that's just a bit of an example. And the way that we calculate, it's a very rough estimation of like your outs is called the rule of 4 and the rule of 2. These are more or less accurate. So if you're on the flop, you just multiply your outs by 4. On the turn, you multiply your outs by 2.
I think it's like, I don't remember exactly if there's an actual calculation for it, but I know it's like an estimate based on like evidence, basically. Like if you actually go and calculate it, it looks like approximately like 4 times the amount of outs, or like 2 times. What does your good friend Google AI say?
Wait, can't you calculate it with like combinatorics, but you won't do it in your head?
Yeah, it's
I mean,
yeah.
you could, yeah.
Like obviously, if you have the time, or if you just crack like that, there's nothing stopping you from thinking, oh, how many cards are left in the deck? What do I need? You can do that, but you're like people are gonna hate you if you're sitting there and you're like, oh, let me think about this. Okay,
They're gonna call
NCR,
clock
yeah, they're gonna call clock, and you're not gonna finish it. It's a pain in the ass to do every time, and like to be honest, even if you do calculate it before they call clock on you, just by slowing down the amount of hands that you see, you're probably reducing the amount of money that you win in an hour. So it's a more or less a good estimation. Just be careful, like I said before. Your this is not your percentage chance of winning because you can always like the opponent can always have better hand. They could completely have all your outs as well. So maybe just be a little cautious about it.
It's also the thing that like if everyone like raise like if it's a raise board and everyone in there and you have like ace king, you have less outs because people like answer like raise board with the high cards, so they have the outs, and you can see that like the board.
Yeah. So Daria is trying to say that like you also can improve on using the rule of 4 and rule of 2 blindly by considering the ranges that your opponent has. If your outs are if your outs are broadly consistent with the range at which they would be in the pot with, then you again have to revise the number down a little, right? Like it's always scary facing a jam with an ace X because like for example, if someone jams and then someone else rejams and you wake up with like Darius said ace king, well there's a good chance that one of them has a pair, right? In which case you have 6 outs. You have your aces and you have your kings. But also you gotta think about the third guy. Could he have ace X, in which case you lose 16% of your outs? Could he have like kings, for example, in which case you lose 32% of your outs? So it can be pretty devastating. And then pot odds, yeah, it's just the thing we were talking about. The basically how much do you need to risk to win what, and you can use the two concepts just like as very basic math. You use two concepts concurrently. You use your outs to calculate to approximate your equity, and then you compare it with your pot odds, and then that forms the foundation for your decision making process. Yeah. If your equity is higher than pot odds, it's profitable call, but you never actually know your equity. We're all guessing here. If you knew your equity, you would have to know your opponent's hands, and poker becomes a very boring game. And then,
You're just doing the whole workshop again.
no, wait, when did you come? What slide is this? It's 10. Yeah, well, I mean, he isn't here, so I guess. Do you have any questions on the previous part? No? Okay. Yeah, MDF is the minimum defense frequency. It is just 100 minus your pot odds, and yeah, it's like your defense ranges. Alpha is like very much the same thing. Start size. Yeah. SPR is it's just how committed you are already. Right? Let's say you have 100 big blinds deep and like on the flop there's only 10 big blinds in the pot. Then in which case you're not that committed and like a four doesn't hurt you that much. But if you already 3-bet, 4-bet, half your stack's in there, and then you're facing a raise and you're like, oh my god, I've already like thrown away half my stack. Can I really fold here? Yeah. Okay. Does anyone else have any questions?
So for like, I guess for like, for minimum defense,
Yeah.
like you get like a percent of how much you should like bet and like fold, like call and fold.
Yeah.
But then I guess like for every hand it'll be like a percentage, right?
Yeah.
So like you can't like perfectly go, I'm gonna do 60% of calls and mix rate. Like it's just kind of like a vibe kind of thing.
Yeah, it's sort of just like a framework, and then because like MDF is a thing that you can calculate because it's just a 100% minus your pot odds, so you can make that calculation. And actually, the more interesting thing in relation to this is how do you approximate randomness? Like let's say you know that you should fold 60% of the time. Well, the human brain sucks at generating true random, and you also shouldn't be doing like, oh, if I want to like bet or fold 50% each, I can't do like bet fold bet fold bet fold because someone's gonna realize. So
What are you looking at? Like a range of percentages. Like for example, if you think you have like 10% or like 20%, you just put that like it could be around 10 to 20%.
yeah, but just continuing with what I was saying, randomness, a pretty like easy thing that you can do. This is more pieces here, but
Just stop there.
this is more like suitable for online. But you can look at time, especially like the digit of the seconds, because that will be true random. And you can say, like, if you want to approximate 50%, you can say, oh, if it's even, I raise. If it's fold, I call. If it's like odd, I fold. Yeah. Pieces here.
Yeah, pizza's here. Kahoot will probably start soon. Feel free to grab as much pizza as you want. Of course, don't take a whole box to yourself because, like, that's a bit unreasonable.
Dude, I want poker right